Waka, hello everybody. This is your professor Adam Dunstan. Today we'll be talking about Yupik and Chupik culture. It's subtitled Ecology and Spirit. I'm naming that in honor of a famous book on Yupik culture called A Yupik Worldview, A Pathway to Ecology and Spirit by the well-known Yupik anthropologist Oscar Kowalski. When we speak of Yupik and Chupik cultures, there would be a variety of ways to introduce these communities. One way that might seem a little strange because it doesn't really tie in with any of the readings, but that it's also kind of, I think, interesting and enjoyable to talk about is what we sometimes call Yupik and Inupiaq sunglasses. Now I put glasses here in quotes because there's not actually glass involved, but what we have here are eyewear that was traditionally made in Inupiaq and Yupik societies. You can see this one is an Inupiaq one that was made out of whalebone. These are Yupik made out of beach grass and other fibers. I think some caribou skin as well on this lower one. And I think all of these come from, or the ones that I know, the ones that I have dates for, these three come from the early 20th century, like 1912. But in any case, this eyewear was used traditionally long before European society had ever developed sunglasses. These were being used in Yupik and Inupiaq territory to help people with sun glare, because if you're not familiar with living around snow, I'll assume that you are if you're Alaskan, but sun glare can really be challenging for your eyes over time, and obviously that would be a big concern if you're walking around in winter in the tundra. So these eyewear narrow the amount of sunlight that's coming into your cornea and help protect you in that way. They also appear to be able to slightly correct vision, at least according to the well-known anthropologist, Dr. Anne Fiona Brewerden, who's written extensively about her, about communities, Yupik communities that she has worked with and for. She is either nearsighted or farsighted, and when she puts the glasses on, she's like, oh, when she puts these eyewear on, she's like, oh, it actually corrects her vision. So anyways, these are fascinating and one of the many ways in which traditional Yupik society has developed a whole array of science and technology to adapt to the tundra environment. Now, that's one way of introducing Yupik and Chupik people. Another way of introducing that would be to say that when we speak of these communities, we are speaking of the largest Alaska Native group, larger than any other single culture in among Alaska Native groups. And we're specifically speaking of the group of people that speak Central Yupik. So that's to distinguish from, like, for example, the St. Lawrence Island Yupik, which live in St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Sea. But we're specifically talking about what we call the Central Yupik, and you can further distinguish there because there's a few communities such as Chivak that refer to themselves as Chupik and speak a dialect of Yupik, so we could kind of further distinguish within that. I'll use Yupik a lot in this culture, partly just for brevity, but referring to both Yupik and Chupik communities. And these are the native people of much of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, so this really large kind of central coastal part of Alaska and all the way from down here in Bristol Bay, all the way north into like kind of North Slope area before it ends. And so the Yupik area, it's the largest Alaska Native group with over 20,000 people who identify as Yupik living in Alaska. And it is also the largest number of people, it's the largest spoken Alaska Native language, which is really fascinating. And so that's a little bit of introduction in that direction as well. Now, when you talk about Yupik land, one of the ways to refer to that in Yupik is Nunamta. And when we speak of Yupik Nunamta, we're speaking of a lush and varied environment, but a lot of it is what we would think of as tundra. And that means that there is definitely trees, and there are wetlands, and there are rivers, and there are also large flatlands. There are about 60 villages in what we call the YK or Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. The largest city in that area is Bethel, whose population is 6,500, but most villages are considerably smaller with populations in the low hundreds very often. I would like to show you now, this is a pretty cool website that you should check out the link from sometime, and it shows you, it's from the Chalista group, and it has like basically place names for a variety of different Yupik communities and natural features in these lands. So let me show you an example. So strongly recommend checking that out on your own time. The other thing I was going to point out for you is some pictures. So this is from Chivac, just to give you a sense of kind of what villages in this area look like. And then I was also going to show you the larger city of Bethel. There's some pictures there as well. So this is Bethel. Sorry, I have a tendency to accidentally call it Bethel. It's Bethel is the better way to pronounce that. Population about 6,000. As you can see from these pictures, though, you have a lot of kind of tundra-y landscape here. You have a lot of areas that are predominantly not connected to to the main road system of Alaska, and so would be commuted to in different ways. And that is a little bit about that. But you look at that kind of a landscape such as tundra, and this is kind of, I think, overly exaggerating the point because there's like literally no trees here, and there's definitely trees in the tundra. But you look at land such as that, and as Yupik scholar Dr. Joan Hamilton points out, it is easy for people that were not raised in tundra to think that it is barren, to look at that and say, wow, that does not look very hospitable. But as Dr. Hamilton points out, for Yupik people traditionally, this was a land and is a land for many people to this day who still do a tremendous amount of hunting, fishing, and foraging. It's a land that is really, really rich, right? For one thing, it is incredibly rich in berries. It is very, very rich in fish, boasting some incredible salmon runs, as well as a variety of other kinds of fish resources. Also, you're right by the coast, and many of the villages are, so a variety of different kinds of marine mammals. Traditionally, seal hunting and seal oil were really, really important. But seal oil as food, as a delicacy, seal oil to light for interior lighting, seal oil even for preserving other foods. So you have all these marine mammals, you have a variety of root and other kinds of vegetables that are found within the land. And then it's also a major area for geese and other other birds. And so you have all tremendous amount of geese and other birds that you can be eating. And then you look at even the soil, the sod, right? That sod, the way it is and the way it is constructed and kind of the texture of it, it's really good for insulating houses. And so people traditionally used that for insulating houses. And then even the moss on the ground, right? You look at moss and you might just think, oh, it's that weird kind of cute little plant thing. Moss that is used there, and lichen can be really good for, or at least the moss can be very good for cleaning. And then the grass was traditionally used for weaving, as was shown in the sunglasses example. And so, as Dr. Hamilton points out, looks barren to outsiders. To folks that were raised on this land, it is incredibly rich with resources. And that is, there's centuries old knowledge of views, people that have lived on the land. We sometimes call that indigenous knowledge. We sometimes call that traditional ecological knowledge, the knowledge of a land that gets passed down over generations of tradition. If you're interested in learning more about that, I would recommend to you the website yupikscience.org, which you tell your computer, yes, I really want to go there. And this is from a Chilista Elders Council museum exhibit that was done by Anchorage Museum. And there's just fantastic pictures of a variety of different kinds of Yupik technology. And I really like the way they phrase that as Yupik science, right? Because there's sometimes a tendency to think of science as something that's only done or that emerged only in the West, right, in Europe. And yet, of course, Yupik people have been doing science all along in the sense of learning, often by trial and error and experimentation about their landscape. This shows you the inside of a kaski, which were these like large wooden structures that were then further covered with other materials that were for men and boys, particularly older boys, as kind of a collective home, the communal men's house, as they say, a log and sod structure, home to the men and boys of the community, and also the ceremonial center of the community. And as they pointed out, this was something that people continued to live like that into like the 50s, the 1950s, where you'd have the communal men's house, and then you'd have other homes around them for women and small children, but that has kind of that ceased around the 1950s as people's homes started to change. By the way, another thing you'll notice there, it says Moravian Archives, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. There was pretty significant amount of Moravian missionary activity, particularly from a specific missionary couple whose name I'm blanking on right now, but did some of the earliest ethnography of really detailed writings about Yupik people by non-Yupik author. So anyways, there's traditionally was a strong presence of the Moravian Church, which is a specific type of Protestant church that arose very early on. But anyways, a strong presence of Moravian missionaries within Yupik areas on rivers during spring. So skin boat with a motor, right? I like that picture because it's kind of showing this like traditional practice of covering your boats with skins, but then also like now you're adding a motor on it too, which would be useful. And so check that website out on your own time. I think you'll really like it. I wanted to also share with you a few Yupik words. But before I do that, a quick note. I wanted to add this first video partly because there were some things I wanted to add that weren't in the videos I recorded a few years ago about Yupik culture, but also because in the older videos from 2020 that I have, I incorrectly used the pronunciation Cupik rather than Chupik. I was later corrected on that by a Yupik student of mine. So anyways, I wanted to clarify when you hear me, if you hear me use that phrase, pronounce it as Cupik a couple of times in the next few videos, just understand that I mean to be saying Chupik. I also have a few references to readings that I no longer require in the following videos. I am gradually replacing these videos so that we don't have to, have kind of corrections like the one I'm making right now. But for now, I wanted you to be aware of that. Some words and phrases, though, in Yupik that I thought you might find interesting. We'll talk about this one later on, where the term Yupik comes from. But chamai, which means good to see you, or greeting. Waka, which means hi or hello. Chanar gachit, how are you? Asatua, I'm fine. And again, note those C's, that these C's are CH sounds in English. Kuyana for thank you. You'll remember that that is very similar with just one additional A to the word for thank you in Shukpiak. Tagukak for a grizzly bear. You can compare that to Denaina, where the term for grizzly bear is Kla for brown bear. And I bring that up only because Denaina and Yupik are next door neighbors, but speak such completely different languages. You do sometimes see some words in Denaina that look kind of Yupik or are clearly from Yupik potentially, but generally speaking, drastically different languages, and despite being next door to each other, but a lot of linguistic similarity instead to these folks Shukpiak and these folks Inupiaq. But anyways, with that, I will pause the video and then we will sort of time travel and you'll have my older videos about Yupik language, which I think you'll find really hopefully really interesting. Whether or not I present it well, Yupik language is, in my opinion, one of the most fascinating topics that we talk about this whole semester. Yupik language is beautiful and complex and rich topic to talk about. So there you go.